I'm in this issue of Simulacrum, and it's all about silence. And as I was reading the other contributors and also thinking about my own contribution, I decided that I would take you on a little tour through the building where I work. And the theme I chose for this issue of Simulacrum was about buildings, architecture, and how they contextualize and mark and can contain or even frame silence. So as a musician, I'm really interested in silence. A lot of the work I do is with very noisy music and in very noisy places, but sometimes I also work with silence. And a lot of that interest came from working in this building. I'm at the former US Embassy, which is in The Hague, and this building was designed by the architect Marcel Breuer in 1955. It's a classic example of brutalism with very strong, powerful lines, lots of concrete, and no relation at all to its context. But inside it has some very beautiful spaces which contain a lot of interesting elements of silence. I have a studio here, I work here. I've been here about 3 or 4 years. When I first came to the building, it was just 2 of us, and we were in this enormous building, 4 stories in the center of The Hague, completely by ourselves. And it was very strange. I mean, there was this grim feeling because, of course, it had belonged to the Americans, and it was a building which had a history of, politics, diplomacy, but also problems, protests. The CIA had an office here, the FBI, and the National Security Agency, and all these sort of secretive agencies. So you might say that the building had already a kind of a history of silence. And one of the things we kept looking for, we kept thinking, oh, maybe one day we're going to find the bug, Is there? And we imagined it would be like in this room, like behind one of these shelves or something. Or I always thought, maybe these walls are hot, and these walls are hollow. And I thought maybe inside one of these walls. Anyway, we never did find the bug. But there's this kind of history of silencing associated with a major international power like the United States. And so there's silencing, but there's also silence. And silence can be musical, and silence can be something you experience. And a lot of the spaces in this building are very, very quiet, or very isolated, I should say. And so there was this kind of double layer of silence and silencing, which intrigued me, but also disturbed me. I have to say the first year here was very uncomfortable. I always felt sort of looking over my shoulder, feeling I was being followed or listened to. In the end, we never found the bug, and I don't think there was anything that unusual. It just took getting used to. This is my studio. It's where I do most of my work. You see I have some of these distinctive trapezoidal windows which look out onto the Ministry of Finance. I'm here in the center of The Hague. I have my trusty grand piano, microphones, lights, recording equipment, a lot of rugs and carpets and curtains to keep the sound down, to dampen the sound. I'm a pianist, a researcher. I'm studying silence at the University of Leiden. My article actually is about Notre Dame, and it's about the Cathedral of Notre Dame and the experience of silence inside. Also about the anechoic chamber and the experience of silence inside. Paradoxically or ironically, the buildings where I did most of my research for this article have both been irrevocably destroyed since then. Notre Dame through the fire, it will be rebuilt, but it will not be the same, it couldn't be. And the anechoic chamber in Hilversum was torn down to make way for new construction. So both of the buildings which I reflect on in my article in Simulacrum are gone or changed forever. So I'm going to focus today on a different building, the building where I work, the former US Embassy, which is in The Hague and was designed by the architect Marcel Breuer in 1955. I think that every building has its own spaces and its own feel. And of course, this is a very unusual building with a very particular history. Very thick walls, very strange windows. You see these windows which kind of look like exclamation points, or they're out of perspective, or something's wrong. In any case, they're kind of destabilizing. And yet, I find this to be a kind of a restful space. This is the old ambassador's room, where the ambassador would have had his meetings. I like the wood paneling. It has a very sort of 1950s, 1960s feel. It's a little rundown, a little abandoned, a little forgotten, a little lost. I like to experiment with the space and perform music in it and sort of feel how the space responds to the music, because I think music always has a way to sort of gauge the reflections of what's happening in a space. What are the borders, what are the walls, the ceilings, the materials? How do these mark the space? How does the rhythm of the windows relate to the rhythm of a piece of music? And I think all of these things sort of tie together in a kind of a sonic and architectural tapestry.